My name is Fiona. I will be sort of your chair for the evening and also kicking us off with the opening sort of speech, I guess. I'm one of the co-founders of the Black Liberation Alliance, an activist who sort of grew embedded in the student movement with National Union of Students. I was a part of the Goldsmiths Anti-Racist Action occupation of Deptford Town Hall in 2019, as well as various campaigns centered around sort of the anti-imperialist and anti-colonial, anti-racist sort of circles in Southeast London. And I'm really honored and privileged to be surrounded by all of you today with some amazing speakers, trade unionists who have been around and sort of fighting the good fight for years and years, and have more experience than I could possibly think to even imagine. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to everyone's inspiring speeches. And for those of you who don't know about the Black Liberation Alliance, it's an alliance which has come together to demonstrate the unity of African, Asian, Arab, Caribbean, and other Black and Indigenous communities, coming together for our liberation, for anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggle. And we're meeting today in a time of great crisis in the world. We have called this meeting because we want to draw the links between the struggles against racism, imperialism, war, and climate change. Because it is clear now more than ever that the top 1% create these crises in their pursuit of profit and power. And whatever the crisis is, it's us that have to pay for it. And that's why we feel the strikes are so important to mobilize, to engage in, to build momentum for, because we are at a time of spiraling costs and economic turbulence, where 500,000 workers went on strike on February 1st, the biggest strike action recorded in decades in this country. As we all know, the cost of living crisis impacts communities, in particular Black communities. The Tories, this government, they want to decimate the public sector in favor of privatization. And this is where our communities are more likely to work. And this is why it is so important for us to be supporting the strikes. In supporting the strikes, we are supporting Black communities, we are supporting African, Asian, Arab, Caribbean, and other Black and Indigenous communities in their struggle in the workplace, in the public sector, whether it's the NHS or our national rail. And so defending workers' rights and the right to strike does benefit our communities. Studies even in the US have shown that unionization has raised the standards of living of the African American community significantly. And of course, this effect was reversed when President Trump, the former President Trump, attacked the unions. And this is why we must unite to oppose all of these similar rhetoric in our own government when they do the same. Whether it's Rishi Sunak or Suella Braverman, they all are pushing the same hateful lines that will affect each and every worker in this country, even if people like refugees and asylum seekers end up the ones being scapegoated. Right now, in fact, in Parliament, they are proposing laws that will attack the right to protest and the right to strike. And passing these laws means that the government are threatened. It means that movements like Black Lives Matter and the trade union movements are effective. And it is clear that we have to oppose these proposals, because if not, there will be even more attacks on the rights of workers and protesters, of everyone in this meeting here today. We must challenge this government when it claims there is no money, there is no magic money tree, so-called, left for our health services, our education, our nurses and doctors and teachers. But the truth is that there's always seems to be more money for war. And that is why, as the Black Liberation Alliance, we are a movement that stands for peace, stands for unity, and stands for an immediate ceasefire and peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. We are opposed to a new Cold War with China. We are opposed to imperialist aggression against countries who are suffering at the hands of colonial powers still, whether it's former countries that were colonized by Britain, to countries in the Commonwealth who are still seeing the effects of colonialism ravaging their economies today. Right now in Denmark, for example, the government are proposing to abolish a public holiday in order to pay for an increase in military spending. And this means the workforce is literally having to work harder to pay their government's war. Scientists say this year we have moved ever closer to a global catastrophe than ever before. And every time our taxes are diverted into bombs and weapons instead of schools, hospitals, renewable energies, our governments are just ever closer to that catastrophe. And it is not just as attacks against rights for workers or protesters that our communities see. It is acts like when Rishi Sunak has made, quote unquote, stopping the boats crossing the channel one of his top 5 priorities in his first 6 months in government. And that is because his government of millionaires refuses to solve the crises and whips up racism and creates an ever more hostile environment to distract from the government's failures. So whenever you hear the politicians say, stop the boats, remember that it's waves of migrants on boats like the Windrush that have built the public services like the NHS that we all benefit from today, who have built the transport systems and so many other public services this country is so proud of, that this country likes to tout during the Olympic Games or football anthems. And it is ironic that Suella Braverman, Rishi Sunak, and Priti Patel all come from families, funnily enough, that will have stepped off a plane or a boat at some point to be here, that have migrated here to be in this country. But now they stand with the shameful system that attacks refugees and ends in brutal deportations. And that is why, as a Black Liberation Alliance, we are calling everyone here and everyone in trade union movements to join us for the United Nations Anti-Racism Day demonstration on Saturday, 18th of March, where every year, thousands and thousands of trade unionists, of organizers, grassroots collectives join together to essentially take a stand against racism and show the far right that we come in, they may think that they have the power to mobilize in their dozens, in their hundreds, but we have thousands, we have millions, and they will be defeated. We stand with all of those that this government targets and attacks, all of those who are willing to stand up for a better world in which people and planet come first over profit. So whether you say Black Lives Matter, no to war, or refugees welcome here, we are with you. We stand in solidarity with you, and we will fight with you and alongside you. And we just hope that with all of these efforts that we find more commonalities than we do differences in our struggles, that there is solidarity with our striking cleaners and lecturers, that got everyone from students at Goldsmiths to workers on the London Underground can put our differences aside and find the momentum to drive this government to roll back on its disastrous cuts on our public sectors. And let's keep striving to put Black unity at the heart of everything we do. Because when we unite, the alliances we form circle the globe. We are the Black global majority, never the ethnic minorities. Thank you. It's always awkward when I'm the one chairing and doing a speech. Thank you so much for listening to me. Any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. Keep your comments, keep your feedback coming in the chat box. And I'd now like to introduce to our next speaker, which is Zita Holbourne from Black Activist, the National Chair of Black Activists Rising Against Cuts. Zita is a trade unionist and was the former PCS National Vice President, the current joint national chair of the Artists Union in England, and is elected to the TUC Race Relations Committee, the TUC Women's Committee, and the General Federation of Trade Unions National Executive. Zita is also a writer for The Voice, The Morning Star, and The Guardian. And of course, she is the co-founder and national chair of the activist group Black Activists Rising Against Cuts, UK. So without further ado, take it away, Zita.
Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. Really important event, and great that you have organised it to focus on the impacts of Black workers and why we should support the strikes. I think to look at where we are now and why the cost of living crisis is impacting on us as Black communities and workers and service users disproportionately, we need to look back to what we've had to contend with over the last decade or so. So we've had over 10 years of austerity, which impacted disproportionately on Black workers and communities. So not just in the workplace, in every aspect of life, in access to essential and crucial and specialist services, in access to housing, impacts on education, the cost of education with tuition fees, meaning that for many would-be students, they couldn't afford to go and study and further their education. So we've had to contend with that whole 12 years, 14 years of austerity that we've been through. We then had a global pandemic, and the pandemic impacted on us disproportionately. And that included contracting and dying of COVID, but it also impacted on us at work. And it was Black workers that were the first to lose their jobs during the pandemic, because they already worked precariously, and they worked precariously because of discrimination that we face in the labour market and in employment and in society, and were more likely to be furloughed than their white counterparts. And unfortunately, we have Black workers who lost their lives, people like Belly Majinga, going to work, because Black workers in the public sector and in customer-facing roles are more likely, so in public service, are more likely to be in those customer service roles and customer-facing roles and on the front line. So having to interact, they weren't the workers that could work at home and stay at home at a desk. They had to physically go to their workplaces. So the knock-on impact on us has been huge from all of that. Members of one of my unions, PCS, is one of the unions that's been taking part in the strike action. We've just had strike action. We've got more coming this month on budget day. And we have a large number of Black workers in the civil service and in the public sector. And the reason for that historically is because of the discrimination that existed in the private sector, meaning that Black workers couldn't get a foot in the door, and the expectation or the hope that it was going to be better going into the public sector in terms of equality and race equality. Actually, we face huge battles. We face harassment and bullying. We face barriers in promotion and progression, as well as in recruitment itself, discrimination in appraisal and reporting. So we have to contend with a huge number of issues in the workplace, and more likely to be held back in the lowest grades, on the lowest pay, and to be in roles that have been outsourced from the public sector and privatized, which means that we have different, not just different, but worse terms and conditions than our counterparts working in the civil service. And in addition, lower pay and not even a living wage. And in addition to, because of all of that, plus the fact that we've had pay freezes and pay caps for over a decade, which in real terms has been a pay cut, we struggle to make ends meet. We struggle to survive. We struggle to live. We may have to do 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. And it means that the pay gap between Black and white workers and the pay gap between women and men at work has widened, it's broadened. So there are so many knock-on impacts on us. So when we look at where we are now, and we look at the cost of living crisis we're in, we are at the brunt, we are bearing the brunt of that. We're the hardest hit by that. We're struggling the most. And I believe that we deserve equality in our own lifetime, as well as creating a positive legacy for the next generation, because those public sector jobs are not there in the way that they've been treated. They've cut the work down and then tripled the workloads for the existing workers, or outsourced and privatized areas of the work. So those jobs aren't even available to the next generation coming through into the workforce. So it isn't that, we should just, as Black workers, be giving solidarity to those strikes. We are those workers who are impacted, and we are those members of trade unions. This is something that impacts us in a very, very harsh way. We've just gone through a really horrible winter, a really difficult winter, having just come out of a global pandemic, and we're not even out of that pandemic in any case. We're still at risk. There are still concerns. There are people still contracting COVID. 1 minute left, okay. And we have the fight of our lives ahead of us. So we need to be at the forefront of that fight, because it's something that impacts on us. We need a seat at the table in the negotiations that is happening with employers and trade unions, but we also need to be on those picket lines and out on strike. And if we are not members of trade unions, I would urge everybody to join a union. It's so important, because it's much harder to fight by yourself as an individual than it is collectively. But in addition, the more members we have join a trade union, the stronger that trade union will be when it goes out on strike. And yes, the strikes have had major impacts on all sorts of people and their ability to go about their daily lives. That's exactly what we want to happen. We need the country to come to a standstill. There's a number of unions have called strike action on the 15th of March on Budget Day. I expect more will come out and join those ones that have already called action. In fact, just this week, the NUJ have called action for their members who are working in local radio. And Barrack has a campaign and a petition on the cuts to local radio, which will disproportionately impact on the Black and Asian programming. So I'd urge you to support that, and I'll put a link to that in the chat. And I think I'll stop there, because I'm sure my last minute is up, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Zita. That was a really important reminder there that, you know, it's not just solidarity. We are the workers who are on the front lines. We are the ones who are facing the brunt of this so-called cost of living crisis, this cost of capitalism crisis, shall we say. And speaking of COVID, I was reading just the other day that there have been a lot of calls into putting to promote a charge for an independent public inquiry on the effect of COVID-19 on quote unquote BAME communities, particularly as I think, especially in the past 3 years or so, we've seen that, especially in the NHS, Filipinos have made up actually 25% of all deaths in the NHS workforce due to COVID, and 30% of all deaths among nurses in particular were Filipinos. And taking into account the BAME community, this percentage is still incredibly disproportionate, perhaps not as high overall in comparison to their white counterparts, but still extremely troubling, considering at the beginning of the pandemic there was already so much about the lack of PPE, the lack of support for those in the NHS, and there's no doubt that since the pandemic is ongoing, but a lot of the restrictions have now been removed and relaxed, NHS workers are still on the front lines. They are still at risk. They don't have the protection they need. So what is it we are doing to support and campaign for them? If anyone is working in the NHS who is joining us today, please share your experiences. We'd love to hear about, you know, strike action. What's the feeling like among your colleagues? And we've got a good question, you know, from Adria there that hopefully we can get into later. Adria, if you'd like to pop that into the question and answers, we can definitely ask our speakers at the end. Thank you once again, Zita. We're now passing the mic over to Roger McKenzie, the international editor of the Morning Star. And Roger has a history of high-ranking trade union activism, including being the Assistant General Secretary of Unison and a member of the TUC General Council, amongst many others. He has extensive expertise on race equality issues, and in particular for building Black self-organized structures and spaces within the labour and trade union movements, appearing extensively on radio and TV to put forward the case for working people and trade unions to work in tandem. Take it away, Roger.
Thank you, Fiona. And can I thank you for your contribution earlier on, which I thought was outstanding, by the way, and also to the organisation holding this meeting. It's really refreshing as well to have an organisation that's not afraid to say Black and doesn't lapse into one of these bloody acronyms that everybody seems so fond of these days. So congratulations for that. I know I've only got 6 minutes, so I'll get straight into the points that I want to make. It's not a cost of living crisis for everybody, of course, because it's a cost of living crisis for the working class, and within the working class it's a cost of living crisis for the Black community within the working class, because as many of us have been saying for many years, we're right at the bottom of the pile, and we've been telling unions this for a long time, we've been telling politicians this for a long time, that we are at the bottom and we are struggling to survive, we're struggling to put bread on the table, we've been struggling to keep a roof over our heads for many decades. So when we started this whole thing, this whole particular latest crisis that we're in, not all of us started from the same position. And it's really worth remembering that wherever we come out of this, that we cannot go back to a position where Black people are still at the bottom, still struggling, and that we don't address this whole issue of inequality. But of course, the other side of the coin that I talked about when I said that we're all struggling as the working class to survive, is that there are some other people, the ruling class, frankly, who are doing very well, thank you very much, and have seen their profits and have seen their wealth massively increase over the last 2 or 3 years during the pandemic, at a time when people were peddling this line that, oh, everybody's in this together, everybody's struggling in this together. At that time, when our people were dying on the front line in record numbers because of the pandemic, these people were raking in their profits, and their mates from the pharmaceutical companies absolutely refused to even share the technology that could save lives for many people. What they were more interested in was how much they were going to make out of people's deaths. And that might sound harsh, but you know what? It's actually the truth. Now, I want to offer my solidarity to all of those workers in whatever job you're doing, if you're standing up and taking industrial action at this time. And when it comes to the 15th of March, by the way, the Ides of March, the ruling class better beware the Ides of March and what's going to happen, because working class people won't go back to the way that it was before. We are standing up and taking industrial action. I suppose the point that I wanted to make, Fiona, is really this, is when you're in the eye of the storm as a worker and you are taking industrial action to improve your own terms and conditions and to improve your own pay, so that you can actually afford to turn the heating on, that you can afford to turn the lights on or whatever, then it's really difficult to remember, it's a challenge to remember that this is not just happening in this country. What we see is workers under attack internationally. So this isn't just about a crisis of cost of living in this country. This is actually about the ruling class attacking working class people across the globe. You only have to look across the channel and look at France right now, where we've seen I think we're up to 6 days now of industrial action that workers have taken in France to stand up for their pensions. It's no accident. And these people are being attacked. These workers are being attacked at a time when they are also struggling with their cost of living, to meet their cost of living. And the employers there are very happy to offer them wages that are way below the levels of inflation. But then the government steps in and starts to say, not only are you going to have to have pay rises that are below the level of inflation, what we're going to do is attack your pensions. What is a pension? A pension scheme is deferred pay. So it's pay. So not only are they saying, you're going to have to take pay rises that are below the level of inflation, what they're actually saying is that you will have to struggle by this deferred pay that you have every expectation of being able to receive is going to be, you're going to have to work 2 years longer for it, so from 62 to 64. But of course, it's not just France. In my job as the international editor of the Morning Star, I see all of these struggles taking place across the globe, and I see people standing up not just against the cost of living crisis that they face, but also see workers standing up against racism. In Tunisia this weekend, massive protests that took place because the president, the racist president of Tunisia, decided he was going to attack migrants who were working in Tunisia, who were from sub-Saharan Africa, so Black Africans. And how dare he do that? But what was great about that, and what's great about what's happening in France, and what's great about what's happening in Madrid today, where workers are on strike as well, and great about what's happening in the UK, is that workers are fighting back, is that we are fighting back. And in those areas that many of us struggled in for many years to see a Black presence, and particularly in the public services, because frankly, trade unionism in large parts of the globe is a Black activity. It's a public service activity, and it's a Black activity because most of those areas are areas that Black workers have been able to get jobs in. What it means is Black workers across the globe are standing up and fighting back. And we should not just celebrate that. What we should do is work out practical ways of giving them solidarity and support. And sometimes that means that we should travel and stand on their picket lines. We should invite them to stand on our picket lines in this country too. But what we should also do is we should be proud to talk about our struggles. We should be proud, and we should be making sure that we go out and try and find other people to build the movement that's going to be necessary to bring about a fundamental and irreversible shift in favour of working class people in this country and across the rest of the globe, because actually that's the only thing that really will make a difference. Solidarity to you all, and all power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. Inspiring and motivational as always. I always do love hearing your speeches. It gets me pumped up, fired up, ready to go out and strike. Mega clapping from Yuri. Brilliant. Keep your comments and feedback coming, people. We want to hear from your experiences, from your knowledge, from your part of the world. Speaking of international strike action, I was reading there's actually a massive sort of breakthrough in Peru at the moment, where there are talks of a national strike with over 200 unions getting involved in the action. Amidst the re-election of the new president in Nigeria, some sectors are also calling for a strike, a general strike. So all across the world, we've got Black workers, we've got disenfranchised workers who are taking to the streets, who are refusing to bow down to their government's cuts and austerity. And it's so important that we acknowledge that our struggles, no matter where we are in the world, are united, that they are connected, that, you know, imperialism knows no bounds, that the workers of the world, we are all disenfranchised in some way, but Black workers in particular, we are always the ones on the front lines. We are the ones, you know, our ancestors, our families, our people in the homeland, we are the ones who do have to suffer the brunt of imperialist exploitation, whether it's from the West or from their own national circumstances. But now to bring things a little bit back closer to home, we've got Charles Fisher joining a speaker who will be speaking next as the chair of RMT Deptford. RMT, for those of you who don't know, and I'd be very surprised if no one here knows, is the rail workers union whose inspiring action for fighting for better pay and conditions was basically they were the leaders during the summer of discontent, shall we say. It's put RMT at the forefront of the resistance to the cost of living crisis, and they've been all over the media recently, as they rightfully should. And we're going to hear a bit more from Charles about what the latest is going on.
Thank you ever so much, Fiona. And I must firstly applaud both all three of the speakers before me. Extremely inspiring, and I hope I can follow suit. However, obviously my 6 minutes is based back towards what's actually going on, how we got there, and what we can do about it. And I suppose this is the basis of trade unionism from its off. So the first thing I would like to tell everyone on the call is whenever you go to work and whenever you are challenged or you challenge things that happen in work, years before you, someone had to do that to get you where you are now. So irrelevant to what happens, we all have a duty to stand up and not allow the ruling class to take away what people before us have already earned for us. We have a duty to continue that fight and that struggle, and not to relinquish things, but to gain more. It's very, very simple. None of us would have had a weekend if it weren't for those in the 1920s saying, hang on a minute, we can't work 7 days a week. We need a break. As simple as that. Otherwise, we wouldn't work Monday to Friday as a typical 9 to 5 job. You'll be working Monday to Sunday, and you could be working all day and all night. It's very simple. But I'm both proud to be an RMT member. My background is working on for maintenance for Network Rail. I'm a welder by trade, so I'm one of the reasons why the train stays on the track. I'm proud of that too. But Network Rail, in its wisdom, in collaboration with the ruling government at this moment in time, have decided that is both acceptable and feasible to get rid of half of the what we would call an MST, maintenance scheduling task, that provides the safety critical element of allowing trains to run at designated speed throughout the track layout and the systems throughout the country. From the basis of that, they then decided that it makes sense, because half of those scheduled tasks are to dissipate, that they only need 60% of the workforce that they have at this moment in time to undertake the 50% less tasks. While, and you would have noticed that your train services, especially on overground trains, so I'm not talking about the tube, I'm just talking about mainline trains, you will notice that your train operating companies have already changed your timetables, and you aren't getting the same amount of and the same frequency of trains that you were getting before COVID. Now, this is all a mass ploy to effectively do what every one of my fellow comrades have already said, which is make the working class or the working railway work harder with less persons with him. And on top of all of that, they've even looked at changing what we would call our terms and conditions as stated by our contract. They call that a working practice, to put an element of changing the working practice to make us effectively work longer hours and at a drop of a hat, a couple hours before our start shift, a couple hours after our start shift. Like the whole pot that Network Rail, with all the ingredients they put in a pot, just don't make any sense. So what wholesome flavor they seem to think they're going to get out of the meal that they're attempting to produce, I'm not looking to taste. And that's kind of the basis of why the RMT were like, well, hang on a minute. The first thing is, 6 months ago, we were key workers. We weren't allowed to be furloughed. I had colleagues that I worked with for 6 years succumb to COVID because they had to come to work. And not to say that I didn't grieve for those said individuals, but the grieving was done while I was still working with others. And I lost 2 good friends, 3 extremely hardworking union reps, all over the age of 50, and 4 from ethnic minorities. And to me, that just shows that, other than the fact that my company really don't value what we produce and what we do and how we keep the country moving, and we kept the country moving during COVID. As soon as we've come out of that, the ruling class has then decided that I must work harder for longer for effectively less, as a thank you to keeping the country mobilized and keeping the lights on for my other colleagues, keeping the nurses getting to work and the doctors. And as a public sector, part of the public sector organization, it's like, are you for real? Are you joking? Like, and obviously the answer is what you've seen. You've seen a number of my management structure within the RMT on TV. I know he doesn't class himself as a minority, but Mick Lynch is Irish born and bred and is a migrant, not of the BAME type, but he's still a migrant into this country. And you see him absolutely destroying and annihilating politicians and reporters and all of these people that are so far removed from what it is, that what we do, that how we keep things going. So my message is, when you see a picket line, you stop. You support, you shout, you scream, you congratulate. And like my other esteemed colleagues have stated, if you're not part of a union, I don't know what you're doing. Because unionism is the only way that we can topple the ruling class and play them at their own game. Because as we say in the RMT, unity is strength, unity is power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Charles. Unity is strength, unity is power. That's really beautiful. Chilling words. I got goosebumps. That was brilliant. Thank you for sharing with us that sort of stark reminder of why it is that workers are striking, why it is it's so important that everyone, regardless of whether you work for Network Rail or a teacher or a junior doctor, why we need these strikes, why we need to establish this community of care for each other. Because during COVID, key frontline workers, key workers were left to deal with the consequences of a government that did not care about us, that did not care whether we lived or died. And so now we have to look after each other. And we look after each other by getting out on the streets, going on strikes, supporting our other communities and sectors where we can, and doing exactly everything that Charles was saying. And on that note, I'm going to take you over now to Denis Fernando, who's here standing in for Stabby today from Stand Up to Racism. For those of you who don't know, Stand Up to Racism is a national organisation campaigning against racism, fascism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and as well for refugee and migrant rights. Its alliances include faith communities, trade unionists, and parliamentarians across a broad united front against racism. Thank you so much for joining us, Denis. Take it away when you're ready.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you to the BLA for inviting us, and to all the comrades on the platform for their inspiring speeches. It's quite an act to have to follow, so yeah, here goes. Firstly, I wanted to express how important this meeting is in showing solidarities with the strikes. It is thanks to the trade unions that we have so many of the hard fought for rights that the working class have today. As Roger said, we wouldn't have the weekends without the trade unions. And these rights are under threat, and the battles in the days ahead will be definitive. So the victory of the strikes is critical, and their struggle is all of our struggle. And Stand Up to Racism has proudly been on the picket lines with trade unions, and we encourage everyone here to do the same and to show solidarity with the strikes whenever and wherever possible. The trade unions are also critical to the formation of Stand Up to Racism and the progressive anti-racist movement. And as has been said, the multiple crisis is being answered with this government's brutal approach to workers, and that is disproportionately hitting Black communities. To compound all of this, they are failing us on institutional racism. In order to close the inequalities gap, they would have to pay £300 billion to Black communities and £1,200 billion to women. There is no chance of them doing this. And in order for us to get anywhere close to it, we need to unite and we need to campaign together with all who are being oppressed on the grounds of racism, sexism, LGBT plus phobia, disability, and all other oppressions. We are seeing racist attacks going up by 19%. We have seen a systematic crackdown on the BLM movement because it is effective. In the US, it became an electoral force and defeated racist Donald Trump. So that is why this government has cracked down on it. So there should be no surprise to anyone here, and there isn't any surprise to anyone here, that the institutionally racist police force continues unfettered. And that means the strip searching of Black children, with the horrific victimization of child Q in the last year, and the shooting of Chris Carver also in the last year alone. So instead of addressing the institutional racism that we all face, the government are whipping up racism, scapegoating communities, and diverting attention from the daylight robbery that goes on amongst those in power. And while we and many others are struggling economically, Shell is announcing £68.1 billion in profit. Fossil fuel companies are charging higher amounts for heating bills. And rather than stop the oil addiction with cheaper renewable energy, Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak want people to think that it's the people in boats that are the problem on the channel. Really, they are the victims of conflict, of centuries of economic colonialism, and increasingly, they are climate refugees. So countless millions will be displaced by the companies that are making profit from burning fossil fuels and end up burning the planet. So we have to stand up to the racism that is fueling all of this inhumanity and build the demo on the 18th of March. We have to show the strength of the anti-racist majority. The Tories are more racist than ever before. There has been a massive rise in support for Farage, for hard right fascist movements, and for QAnon. The far right is gathering here and across the Western world. Home Secretary Suella Braverman is giving succor to the far right and to fascism. She described refugees as an invasion of our southern coast days after an asylum centre was firebombed by a fascist. More recently, in response to the widely criticised Shawcross review of Prevent, Braverman said, Prevent has shown cultural timidity and an institutional hesitancy to tackle Islamism for fear of the charge of Islamophobia. Well, actually, the opposite is true. We've seen Muslim children of nursery school age being referred to as Prevent, according to Prevent's own statistics from April 2021 to March 2022, for the second year in a row, referrals because of extreme right-wing radicalization, 20%, were higher than ISIS-type terrorism referrals, 16%. This underplays the threat of the far right and whips up hostility against Muslims, which in turn builds the far right. So what happened since the publication of the Shawcross report on Prevent? Just 2 days later, we have seen an explosion of fascist demonstrations attacking the hotels housing asylum seekers in Knowsley and up and down the country. Most of these demonstrations were organised by fascists linked to the neo-Nazi National Action and led by Mark Collett, a former leading member of the British National Party, the BNP. This is happening in Knowsley, where a young black man, Anthony Walker, was brutally murdered in a racist attack historically. So we can see how this is heating up and getting worse as time goes by. And that's why we have a duty to oppose these fascist demonstrations and support the counter demonstrations against them. All this is happening in the context of a government attacking the living standards of the 99%, while the 1% make profits to the tune of ever-growing billions. The cost of living crisis is a political choice that's disproportionately impacting on Black communities, and this is why we have to support trade union strike action. The Tory government is ensuring our communities are on the sharp end in the midst of this multiple crisis. They want the public who are angry at these crises to be angry not at the billionaires or those who are in power and are failing them. You only need to look at the treatment of Shamima Begum. Stripping Shamima Begum of her UK citizenship is racist. Begum was 15 when she travelled to Syria from the UK, a move which was facilitated by someone working for the Canadian Security Services. She should be allowed to return to the UK and be subjected to the justice system here. And let's note the double standards. Have you heard of a white far-right fascist terrorist being stripped of their citizenship? Me neither. It has now been written into the law that dual nationals can also be stripped of their citizenship. And this has the potential to lead to a whole second Windrush scandal. And if all this feels uncomfortably close to all of us on this call, that is because it is. But luckily, we have each other. We have the ability to organise and to forge alliances with those in the trade union movement. We need to build the challenge now by taking on the racist arguments and building the broadest possible movement. So let's put marching into the month of March. Join the Resist Racism demonstration on Saturday, the 18th of March. It's great that Black Liberation Alliance had a block at the demo last year and is mobilising against this year. Let's get out and support the strikers, as other speakers have said, on the 15th of March. And let's kick it all off with a Twitter storm on Thursday, the 9th of March, 11 to 12 noon, hashtag Resist Racism, to build for the demo. Thank you all very much. It's really great to be here.
Thank you so much for your contributions, Denis. Really important for us to hammer home that the attacks on the far right, the attacks from the far right, sorry, are not in isolation. They don't operate in a vacuum. It's all coordinated, and it is a very telling distraction at a time when people are having to choose between sort of heating and eating. That suddenly refugees and people on boats are allegedly the people that we should be watching out for, and when we all know that it's entirely not true. Would you please post the links and on details of the Twitter storm as well when you get a chance, so people can jump on that and add it to their calendars so they know? Oh, okay, one of our volunteers has done that. Fantastic. Thank you for that. And just before we move on to sort of like our Q&A bit, I just want to thank all the speakers for speaking such amazing truth to power, and sharing your experiences and analysis of the current situation. I think it's really important that Black self-organization is at the heart of everything we do when it comes to organizing and class struggle, especially because it is African, Asian, Arab, Caribbean, and other indigenous communities who get hit the hardest, who are also, ignored the most as well, arguably, in these circumstances, because we are made to feel invisible. We are made to feel as if our problems are problems that we have created, as opposed to ones that have been imposed upon us due to government legislation and policies. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you to all of our speakers.